be very few such ceremonies now. We've managed to wipe out most of the Aboriginal people, so there's very few who live in a kind of tribal sort of way. So there's so that you're probably unlikely to ever get a photograph of a Bora ceremony now. So it's an initiation ceremony. I won't go into details on that. So for the Aboriginal peoples, the metaphysics, a sense to what beings have to be, because of the terms of life are fixed. So there is a religiosity in understanding the spiritual understanding of nature. There's a complex totemism and what totems belong to what tribe and who you belong to as a result. And there's ritual and art, and so they have this intricate ordered life. So what the Aboriginal peoples had was a very highly developed social structure, rather than a kind of metaphysics as such. So it's not a metaphysical structure, it's a social structure. So to understand what Aboriginal life is about you need to understand their social structure, because what life is flows out of the social structures that they have. And as I mentioned, kinship, relationships are vital, and there would be very ordered structures of how I relate to particular people. My relationship to my mother-in-law, for example, father-in-law, brother-in-law, sister of my wife, and so on. There are very ordered relationships that structure the social order. So again, there's another little image of cave art. There are the animals there, which would represent the animals within the particular land that belong to the peoples there. So, highly developed interaction of interrelationships. Three things: there are customs, there are cumulative knowledge which had to be passed on to the right people, and what these effects had to do with the society, and so there was also then the power of abstract reason. That the Aboriginal people were very good at rationalising. So social organisation is the dominant way of thinking about it. So whenever you're thinking about what to do, you need to think. You don't think about it in terms of what's best for you, but how this affects the social relationships and the structure of society. So it applies not just, it applies in every context basically. Everything relates back to those social structures. So here's another little example of some of, well, I suppose an image of some social structures. Well, it's not really an image of social structures, but it gives you a hint of the ways in Aboriginal peoples interact and talk to one another in a society. So, the principle of relatedness, known people of known descent to the whole face of human society. So you've got here some of the ways in which we make connections. So here the idea of how do I relate to strangers that I meet? Well, interestingly, the terms that I use for the stranger are not stranger. Terms are going to be the same as one uses for brother, father, mother, sister, father's mother, brother, and so on. There's no strangers. They're all kin in some form or other. Just have to work out and know what that relationship is. So the stranger is not a stranger. Interesting idea, isn't it? Okay. Well, again, there's a totem, a mask. Just another. So reciprocity and exchange. It's a primal religion which depends on reciprocity and exchange and has the following kinds of characteristics. It's not universal, but ethnocentric and non-missionary in nature. Aboriginals aren't looking to convert anybody to their religion. Human beings are akin to nature, children of Mother Earth, siblings to the plants and animals. So they have a different, you could remember St. Francis talks about Sister Moon and Brother Sun. The Aboriginal peoples already had that kind of idea, that we were related in some way to the animals. Human beings are finite, weak and impure and in need of a power not their own. So interestingly, the sort of fallenness to some extent of human beings. So human beings are not alone in the universe. There are spiritual beings that are more powerful than we are. We can enter into this, but interestingly it's benevolent mostly, and receive protection from those who might be malevolent, those beings. Ancestors are the living dead, and they remain united in affection and in mutual obligations with the living. So there's no dead, they're just living dead kind of thing. An interesting idea, never gone. And we have that to some extent, that when we think about our loved ones, they're always present to us in some way. The idea that love never dies, that when we love someone, even if they're gone from us, we still love them. The Aboriginal people, it's more immediate than that. They're not gone at all. They're just in another place. And a place that you can contact, that in fact there can be this contact through sacred ceremonies and so on. So they're always connected. The physical acts act as the vehicle for spiritual powers. So human beings actually live in a sacred universe, a spiritual universe. They're not separable from, so there's no, in a sense, there's no such thing as a physical universe and a kind of spiritual universe. As I said at the beginning, these two categories don't apply. We're embedded within a spiritual universe. So there's no sharp dichotomy. And there's another little painting that was of the Quat people hunting some emus. So, their way of life demonstrates some of the values and characteristics of a society that was ordered to the common good, which included both living and non-living beings. They moved in an environment, it's not only they in harmony with that, but also irreducibly part of that. So they don't identify themselves as separate from the environment. So in a kind of sense, they could be the rock kangaroo if that was their totem, because there's no distinction between spirit and physical. So physically, clearly, I can't be the rock kangaroo. Aboriginals aren't stupid. So if somebody was saying, "Oh, I'm a rock kangaroo. Oh, we need some food today, so we better kill that rock kangaroo." No. So, but the essence of what it is to be a rock kangaroo was something that could be grasped and also, I suppose, experienced. So unity of all kinds of things. So here's another. Now this looks like this is on a wood. There's another on a wood, some sort of timber rather than and again an image of Aboriginal art. So they're not so primitive, it seems to me. So they didn't cultivate crops. Well, that's not entirely true. There is some evidence that they did have, in some places, some settlements of some kind. But it's true, they used tools and weapons made of stone, wood and shell. Why? Well, they were perfectly efficient for the purposes for which they were needed. They had a minimal need for clothing or shelter. If you were a nomadic people that moved around in a place, you don't have to have lots of stuff because you've got to carry it around. I mean, for example, if I've got 3 spears, I've got to carry 3 spears when we move from where we are. What am I going to do with 3 spears? I can only use one at a time, and they're heavy. So I only need one. I'll give away the other ones to somebody who hasn't got them. So there was no need to have lots of stuff, because if you pack up to go somewhere, Well, you don't want to have to carry it all. You've got to have a minimum amount, obviously. But they didn't need to develop a great civilization because they lived in a particular context, in a particular place, which was them. That place was them. You didn't move out. You moved about in that place. So, once the food was exhausted in one area, you moved to the next. Or if you wanted to get the animals to come to you, well, you set some of the bush on fire, controlled burning, so that when the new grass grew, the kangaroos would be attracted, or what other animals you were interested in, to eat the grass, and you got your food supplies come to you. Well, what's the need to do much else? So, if you looked at the actual time that the Aboriginal people spent on getting what enabled them to survive, it was pretty minimal. So they had plenty of time for art, for dance, for having leisure kind of activities. So they developed all kinds of things to enjoy themselves. So when you think about it, aren't we stupid working, 8 hours a day and worrying and stressing and building houses and all kinds of stuff like that, and then have no time to actually enjoy our lives? So the Aboriginal people actually had a minimal amount of time, I'll just burn a bit of that grass, things will come to us, spear one, that'll do us for a week or two. Next one comes along, well, that'll do us for another week or two. So they spent minimum amounts of time in hunting, gathering food. And so because they had intimate knowledge of that land, they also never overexploited it. They knew when it was time, leave it alone. We've got to move on to the next bit because we need this to regenerate and recover. The other thing about it, they left minimal impact. So yes, there are, as I said at the start, there are rock paintings and things like that, but they didn't build great shelters. They didn't build, generally speaking, maybe around the coast there were some places where they built middens and they built ways of trapping fish and so on. So they had some ways of, so there's still evidences of those that go back a couple of thousand years, but by and large, there's very little impact on the environment. They lived entirely in harmony with it. So they had plenty of time to do other kinds of things. So interestingly, we might want to reflect on this when we think of what we do to our world, damaging it and using and exploiting all the resources, allowing plants and animals to become extinct. Maybe we're not using the resources that we have wisely, and the idea that we are individuals and therefore should be pursuing individual interests is something that doesn't occur to the Aboriginal person. And it's still there today. So, if I'm a successful Aboriginal, then I'm expected to look after my kin. It's not it's kind of an optional extra. It's just that, cousin Bill will come along and say, well, can I stay here for the night? And you don't say, no, because this is my place. This place is our place. So there's a different way of, you share what you have. So there's, and it's not like, well, it's an optional thing that out of the goodness of my heart I'll let, the ne'er-do-well drunken old Uncle Bill or, cousin Bill stay at my place and, hopefully push him out in the next morning so he can go away. No, it's not like that at all. Well, of course, cousin Bill, this is his place as much as anybody else's. So it's a very different way of thinking about it. And you see why there's no real, quest for extending territories, or why the Aboriginal peoples didn't have lots of wars of, Australia's a big place, and if I'm an ambitious warlord, well, I want to conquer the next lot. Didn't occur to the Aboriginals to do that. Sure, they had their fights about various things, but they were mostly about various other kinds of wrongs, like, so-and-so slept with my second wife. Well, that was a bad thing to do. Well, he has to pay for that, so we have to have a bit of a stoush about those kinds of things. So all that kind of thing, or somebody has disrespected me in some way. Okay, so So there are the idea of interconnectors, and we need other beings. I think it's worth thinking about. So here's another bit of rock art. So we can move on from that, and I think we're just about at the end.
No, that's all.
So is that the last one? Okay, so there's the last one. So there you are. That's a little bit about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture. Very different way of thinking about the world to perhaps what we're used to, and one that we could possibly learn a lot from. And my regret, in a way, even though my family were late comers to Australia, is that we need to be extremely sorry for what we have done to the Aboriginal peoples of Australia and how we have destroyed the land and disrespected the people that were there before. I mean, to me, we can never do and take that back, and the Aboriginal peoples now live a life which is neither one nor the other. They're not able to live the sort of life that I'm depicting here, except a couple of remote communities might be able to do it, but by and large their whole way of life has been destroyed. But I think some respect we need to think about how we can learn from, particularly in a country like Australia, that we can learn how to use that country wisely without destroying it. Anyway, so I'll leave it there. Thank you for listening.
So 20 minutes or something for some questions?
Sure. Yeah.
Do they have the notion of evil
The notion of evil, yes. Yes.
and moral principles?
Yes,
How do they
absolutely.
define them?
Yeah.
Yes, they have.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, as I said, the notion of the law is very important. It flows out of the dreaming and understanding that everything has its proper place. So there is how I relate to you, for example, is determined by the law. So because you're the sister of my wife's cousin, or something. I don't know. But that kind of idea. And so that means I have certain kinds of ways in which I must relate to you, and I can't overstep certain boundaries and things. So the law and the notion that I can do what is wrong, evil is certainly possible, and there are people who do evil and they must be punished. And there are ways in which the law requires certain kinds of punishments and so on. So there were elders whose job was to make those kinds of judgments, but judgments were generally made by the group. The community would decide what was right. Or if it's one between two communities, they would have some, for example, spearing. If I'd slept with my somebody else's wife, well, that's a transgression that needs to be punished. So there would be a punishment for that, which might involve something like being speared in the leg. I mean, there was if you killed someone too, there would have to be reparation made about that, because that was pretty serious. It might stop short of you being killed yourself, but it could mean that, depending on what kind of, if it was a killing that occurred in a fair fight, for example. There were rules about fights, that if you and I had to fight, I couldn't use my big heavy spear and you have to use your little knife or something. It had to be fair. So there was rules about conflict, how it was to be managed, what kinds of punishments were suitable for certain kinds of things. Very little of it involved death penalties, because every person's life was very important to the clan. So you've got to remember that I'm not just an individual. So if I committed a crime, it's on the clan. It's the clan that's committed the crime. But if I killed you because you'd killed someone else, then that clan is hurt because someone important to the clan has gone. And so I've done something, by killing you, I've done something against the clan, and so the clan then has a reason to say to the other clan, but you've killed one of our people, so we need reparation for that. So you can see you could have this constant tension. Well, we'll kill another one of those. Oh, but now you've killed it. Well, we've got to kill some. No, you would have this impossible conflict. So there had to be ways in which you would handle those things, and that involved, you know, making reparations in lots of different ways. And these are organised in, you know, they weren't arbitrary. They had to be, you know, things that people would agree to. So you had to go to the law. The law would be known by people. So, you know, there were very few sort of big fights amongst them. And if there were, they were very limited. So, you know, a few people got injured. Well, that's enough. We've satisfied whatever that fight was about. Let's all go home. And the other side of it, of course, is that, you know, but my father-in-law's from that clan, because you couldn't, so I can't really do things against my father-in-law, because that then creates another problem that has to be responded to. So the kinship things were enormously important and powerful. So you had to know, you know, the limits to what kind of. But of course, you know, the idea of wrong and moral wrong was certainly very well developed. So evil was possible. Yes, it wasn't all rosy kind of Garden of Eden stuff. But,
is it possible to say that laws or through dreams, laws are established, but it also, it creates the changing situation and stabilizes the changing situation. There is somebody, I don't know where she or he belongs to, and by establishing through that law that he belongs to, in this web of connection, I might say, right? Yeah. And it establishes or stabilizes the changing situation. New generations coming, and the new web of relations are established through marriages and things like that, and it's kind of...
well, it's a bit more complex. I mean, I guess the web of relationships remain, I mean, whatever they are. Obviously, different people are born and those kinds of things. So certainly the law remains the law, and the law is passed on to the individuals as to what that law is. So you're initiated into various aspects of that tribal life. So, you know, you start as a child and you don't know everything. And when you're an adult, there are only some things that you'll be told.